Title: Shadows in the Mind. In the forgotten corners of a small, insular town, the air hung heavy with secrets that clung to the residents like the stagnant fog rolling in from the nearby river. One such secret was Judith Anderson, a once vibrant artist known for her whimsical paintings of far-off lands and bright, lively creatures. Now, her canvases lay untouched, covered in layers of dust and memories, while she sank deeper into the clutches of her mind, struggling with the shadows that danced in the corners of her awareness. After her husband Thomas died, Judith began to look at the world differently. At first, it felt like mere grief, a fog that obscured reality, but soon it morphed into something beyond her control. Her dreams turned sinister, and the vibrant colors she once painted began to morph into darker, murkier shades. The whispers started soft, like wind rustling leaves, but gradually, they grew louder, forming into a cacophony of voices that only she could hear. As the leaves turned red and gold, heralding the arrival of fall, Judith swore she saw something lurking in the periphery of her vision. It was a dark figure, cloaked in shadows, with eyes that flickered like dying stars. Each time she turned her head to confront it, the figure vanished, leaving only the chilling sensation of being observed. "Just your imagination, Judith," she chided herself, though doubt gnawed at her mind. She sought solace in her painting, but even as she tried to pour her emotions onto the canvas, the colors seemed to blend into chaotic abstractions. Distorted faces and twisted limbs stared back at her, unsettling and unfamiliar. One stormy night, Judith sat in her dimly lit studio, the air heavy with tension as thunder rumbled outside. She painted furiously, lost in a trance, until her brush paused, a shiver running down her spine. The figure emerged again, this time closer, its features a distorted reflection of herself. It grinned with an unsettling glee that made her heart race. In that moment, Judith realized it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was a manifestation of her mental anguish. "Leave me alone," she screamed at the figure, but the laugh that echoed back was not her own, sharp, mocking, and edged with desperation. She stumbled back, clutching a nearby easel for support, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Shadows began to writhe and twist in the corners of her studio, creating a symphony of chaos. "Help me," she pleaded, but the only response was the relentless laughter that filled the air as the shadows closed in, distorting the outlines of her reality. Desperate, Judith grabbed the paintbrush and drove it into the canvas, as if to stab at the very source of her torment. To her horror, the paint bubbled and burst, the imagery bleeding off the sides. Her studio morphed into a living nightmare. Within the paint's depths, she saw her husband, standing in the mist, smiling, beckoning her closer. But as she approached, his form transformed, revealing a twisted caricature, all sharp angles and malevolence. "You'll never escape me," it shrieked, overwhelming her senses. Judith dashed out of the studio, the laughter echoing in her ears, as she fled into the shadows of her own home. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping, trying to snap the threads of disarray tangling in her mind. "Get a grip," whispered a voice that felt foreign yet familiar. But the more she struggled against it, the stronger the pull became, an intoxicating mania that fed on her fear. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers escalated into screams, overlapping until she couldn't tell where one voice ended and the next began. She could no longer decipher friends from foes. They came to check on her, always with concern, hands reaching out, yet they faded into shadows like the figure that haunted her. Isolated, Judith withdrew into herself completely. On one particularly turbulent night, she followed the call of the maddening whispers. She painted with fervor, each stroke more frantic than the last, the room filled with an acrid scent of oil and tears. And then she saw it, the figure standing behind her again, but now it had a name: Despair. "It's time to finish this," it hissed, urging her to rid herself of the shadows that shackled her. Judith dipped her brush into black paint, covering the canvas, obliterating the chaos she had created. As the bristles met the surface, thunder crashed outside, and the lights flickered ominously. The moment the last stroke connected, a deafening silence fell. The shadows receded, but only for a moment. Judith stood before her creation, a monument of darkness, tangible terror swirling across the fabric, echoing her fears. When she looked again, the figure wasn't behind her. Instead, it morphed into her reflection in the dark glass of the studio window. "Let me in," it whispered, the voice now softer yet all the more sinister. "You can't escape me." In that moment, Judith understood. What she had painted was not a creature lurking outside her understanding. It was her very own despair, feeding off her fears, dreams, and memories. The realization hit harder than any paintbrush, and as the shadows swirled, she knew she had become a prisoner in her mind. The townsfolk would whisper of Judith from that day on, the talented artist who mysteriously vanished into her own canvas. But little did they know, sometimes the true horror lies not in what we see outside, but in the dark corners of our own minds. A place where shadows can take form, and reality can fragment beyond recognition.